Welcome to Unit 0, How to Use Scratchzilla. This video is going to go over the first unit inside of our Scratchzilla curriculum that will show you how to use the curriculum so you can be able to go through and self-pace yourself within these lessons and be able to complete the programs. This unit, we're going to cover some of these items right here. One, we're going to go over some art assets right here on this bullet point. Next, we're going to go over how to use the Scratchzilla instruction system on how to start, stop, and test and expand upon your project examples. We try to make it easy as possible for you to be able to get started on those. We also want you to know the difference between the instructional mini lessons and projects. We use kind of a different scheme on how we deploy the lessons, so that way you kind of build small little programs and then evolve those into a larger program. And then after a while, we break free from that strategy and assume that you've picked up all these major skills, and then we start giving you much larger, more complex projects without the mini lessons. Next, we want to go through the color scheme so that way you can quickly identify when it is your time to program or when is it that you should be just reading the detailed explanations. This is kind of critical because a lot of students, they forget to read the information and they just go through and put together the code, and they fail to understand the actual strategies that's being used to create those programs. So in the end, they can't make anything once they get done. So it's very, very critical that you understand that you need to read through these lessons. We'll show you where to do that. It's pretty easy. Next, the basic concept of a function and a multifunction. Multifunction is kind of a term I came up with. You'll see where it plays out in our programs. Also, troubleshooting, which is the ability to figure out the source of a problem when something is not working correctly. This is a huge skill that will save you in the long run of trying to get your program to work. Next, we're going to show you how to create a blogfolio, which is a term that we came up with in order to complete a research paper on the history of games and start making artwork for your first game. And then last but not least, we got some math related to calculating how long a game it takes to make. This first video will go over section 0.1, getting started. First, let's look at the definition of programming. Programming is creating a set of instructions to communicate with a computer to create a desired outcome. And another term for programming that we'll use interchangeably is coding. So whenever we say coding or programming, we're talking about the same thing. All you're doing is using a set of code or instructions to get the computer to do something you want. You power a program to some extent. However, whenever we start teaching programming and computer science, we use very specific instructional tools to be able to create these programs. Next, whenever we do work in our programs here in our Scratchzilla curriculum, we're going to provide all the assets that you'll need for your programs. These assets are going to be the graphics, they're going to be the artwork, music, any sound effects, and any animations that you would need for your program. This is going to help speed up the development time, so the majority of your time will be spent understanding the programming aspects as opposed to the artwork aspects. Not to say the artwork isn't important, however, some of the largest skill gaps whenever people start getting into college or in the professional field is the lack of programming skills. So we want to develop those skills to have a strong foundation, and then as you go through, you might gravitate more towards the art side with these programs. One of the first things we need to understand is the definition of what a software development kit is. Scratch is a software development kit. And a software development kit is a computer software that allows you to create applications, which are computer programs. So Scratch is a software development kit, an SDK, and it's going to allow you to create any sort of program that you want. I would say the limitations of Scratch is that you mainly will be making two-dimensional graphic type programs. You'll be limited to, there's some 3D aspects of Scratch, however most of it will all be 2D. Animations and games. Now, another important concept here is that the Scratch files are forward compatible. And forward compatible means it's the ability to open a file from an older version of software into the newest version of software. In our case, there's an older version of Scratch, which is known as Scratch 1.4, And the files made in Scratch 1.4 can be opened in Scratch 2.0. That probably won't affect it too much. If you're new to Scratch, you'll probably be using the newer version or the online cloud version of Scratch. But if you have an older version of Scratch, your files are compatible with the newer version of Scratch. And these terms also, they apply to other software programs as well, especially if you're using Adobe software or Microsoft software. Next, backward compatible. That means it's the ability to take a file from the newest version of software and open it in an older version. In our case, Scratch 2.0 files, they cannot be opened in Scratch 1.4. There's a big difference in the way the files are made, and they won't convert backwards. So if you make a program in Scratch 2.0, then try to open it in Scratch 1.4, it's not going to work. Finally, the file type. This is going to be how the file is saved. And this is basically a set of information that tells the computer how to use the file and how to open it, where to store it, or how to configure it, and all that other fun stuff. Okay, so a Scratch 1.4 file type is going to have its file name .sb, and then the Scratch 2.0 file type will be a file name .sb2. I'm going to pull up a window here that shows you the file types. I'm using Windows 10, so this is how my files are stored. Yours might look differently based upon the view preference you set for your files, or if you're using a Linux or using an Apple computer. Okay, it'll look a little bit different, but the main thing is you'd have your name of the file. Then over here, the file type is going to be SB2. Okay, you can see that right there. All files that we give you will contain all the art assets for the program. The definition of assets are something that is useful to a person or organization. You'll hear this term quite a bit in your future, especially when you go to college or if you study accounting. In our case, the term art assets are the graphics that you're going to use for your video game. And down here I've got a couple pictures for you. So the left picture is an example of a list of art assets for a video game project in Scratchzilla. And then over here is another example of a list of all the different art assets that we automatically provide for you. So in this one, this picture on the left hand side, this is a little bit more simplistic in its instructions. We give you the sprite, which is the picture at the top, and then all the costumes that are contained within that sprite. And each column represents a sprite and so forth. As we get more advanced, our programs will start looking like this whenever we provide the instructions for you. And you'll see just a list of all the different sprites, and then we'll have a number below it that tells you the number of costumes. If this doesn't make sense, that's okay, because we haven't gotten to sprites. Just know that we're going to provide all the art assets for you, and the advanced versions of the instructions will have just an icon picture of the sprite with the number of costumes, which are the graphic images stored for that sprite. And then the more entry-level instructions will have an icon for the sprite and a small list of all the different assets, or excuse me, all the different costumes or graphics for that particular sprite. I pulled open Scratch so you can see a little bit about what I'm talking about. Right here, this is one of the more advanced programs. However, I wanted to quickly show you what I was talking about, because you might not have heard the term sprites. Sprites are going to be all the objects on the scene that you'll be able to program. For example, all these little virus shapes here, and then these this little tank guy and his computer right up here, and even these little icons that represent the scores and stuff, and even these little yellow dots that float around the scene. Okay, those are all sprites, and those are going to be the items that we program that will go around the screen that you can make them interact with each other or just perform animations. In our sprites, I'm going to click on this one called CPU. Okay, our sprites have a certain number of costumes associated with it. So when I go over here to costumes and click on the list of costumes right here, you'll notice that these are all the different images for this particular sprite. Okay, so that's what I'm referring to in the instructional content, is that I'll give you the icon of the sprite and then the list of number of costumes for it. So that way you know how many are available for it. It's just for information purposes. And we'll do that for each of the individual sprites within the program. Starting the program, These symbols, the green circle and the red octagon, like a stop sign, are going to tell you when to start and when to stop programming. These icons are used in the instructional content, so that way you don't get confused between the explanation material, which has example copies of the code, and the instructional programming material, so you know exactly when it is that you need to be physically programming inside of Scratch. So the green circle is telling you to start, and then the red octagon will tell you when to stop. Next, these are the type of programs we're going to make. And I'm going to go through some of the materials so you can quickly see what I'm talking about. We're going to be creating some mini lessons, which are going to be designed to teach you some of the fundamental skills on how to program. And then the mini lessons will cross over into projects, and the projects are going to be where you put all the material from the mini lessons together and make something much larger and comprehensive. And then once we break from that pattern of going from mini lessons to projects, we'll just switch into pure projects, and these projects will be much larger, but it will use nothing but all the skills that you gathered from the mini lessons, except we'll go very, very deep with those. Some additional lesson materials that you'll see whenever you work in Scratchzilla is that we have our creation stations. This is where, as some people would say, the rubber meets the road. This is where you can take the instructional skills that we've given you and to be able to create a challenge activity or go through and create something on your own based upon a set of instructions. Okay, we won't show you how to do it. You're going to have to figure it out on your own, but you've been given all the tools to go through and figure that out. And then the one I like best, which is called SZ Mashups. This is a programming challenge that allows you to create your own project based upon certain features of other projects you have already created. So we'll tell you to pull out certain aspects of different programs and to put it together and use your imagination and get wild with these to come up with something very unique. I've seen some really cool stuff from students whenever they do these SE mashups. Let's switch over so I can quickly show you what these mini lessons look like and the starting and stopping of the programs. To start, we pulled up Unit 9, the Ant Escape mini lessons. I just picked this one because it's the first one I saw. So Unit 9, and there's 5 mini lessons. Each mini lesson, we have 5 unit will always have 5 little mini lessons. This material right here. So when I go into quickly go through the instructional content, you can see we have some explanations of what's going on here. Here's a list of your art assets. In this case, we'll only have 2. Okay, we're starting off pretty small, and you'll notice there's no costumes below these. That's because these 2 sprites don't have any costume changes within the program, which means there's no animation per se with those actually switching their costumes. Next, right here in the grand scheme of things is our giant green circle that's going to tell us to start programming. Then we'll come to our instructional content to begin programming, and I'll explain all this in the follow-up section here. And then we hit our red octagon that tells us to stop programming. Okay, so what you saw right there is the first mini lesson. Then we go to the next mini lesson, and again, some quick explanation, not very many art assets because we're starting off small. And then we have our instructional content, not too many. Okay, so each one of these build upon the next one. And then what happens, I'm going to click on my table of contents button here to take me back to the main table of contents. Then we'll click on Unit 10. When we get to Unit 10, we'll take all that material that we learned from Unit 9 and Escape mini lessons, and we're going to apply this to Unit 10 and Escape Level 0 mini lessons. And then from here, there's the art assets. There's quite a bit more in this one. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sprites. Technically, I should say we have 4 sprites in one stage, and the stage has 2 different costumes or backdrops, excuse me. And then the maze sprite has 8 costumes, and this particular sprite, the runner, has 6 costumes, and these 2 sprites right here have 1 costume, which indicates that there's none below it. Then we'll go into our instructional content, and then we'll begin programming. So that's kind of the setup between the mini lessons and the main project. Okay, so that wraps up section 0.1. And in conclusion, so you're going to create 4 different types of programs. One is going to be the mini lesson programs. The second type of program you'll make in Scratchzilla is a project. That was the Unit 10 I showed you where you put together to make a comprehensive game. I give you all the material you need for these two. And then the other ones, you're going to have to figure these out on your own. The creation stations, which will be a extension, elaboration based upon the projects or mini lessons. And then the SZ mashups will be pretty much up to you to figure out how you're going to take all that material and put it together to create something new. So 4 programs, 2 of which are going to be skill-based of what you've learned from the other 2. Alright, thanks for watching the video, and we'll see you in Unit 0, Section 0.2.